Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to today's show of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We are in our third season, and we remain just as excited as ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung, heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show in our theme month of energy. And today we're going to look at the state of our clean energy transition that we're currently living in. And we feel like another name for it could have been also health effects of our fossil fuel dependence. Now, fossil fuel production and combustion is a, if not the, major driver of climate change, and it can also directly affect our health in substantial ways. From the electricity that lights our homes, to the cars we drive, to work, our modern life has relied on fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. But burning them creates climate change and releases pollutants that can lead to early death, heart attacks, respiratory disorders, stroke, exacerbation of asthma, and absenteeism from school and work. It may even be related to autism spectrum disorder as well as Alzheimer's disease. Now, the Harvard Chan School studies that they recently did estimate that the impacts of coal and the waste stream it generates are costing the U.S. public one-third to over $1.5 trillion a year. And health and environmental hazards from this stem from exploration, extraction of the coal, processing, transport, and, of course, combustion of coal, as well as the large amount of air and water pollutants that all of those phases in that stream generate. The bottom line is that burning and producing fossil fuels of any sort, really, has a major impact on climate change, air quality, and our public health. Now, a recent group of researchers from across the globe examined the sources and the health effects of air pollution, not just on a global scale, but also they drilled down on it individually for more than 200 countries. But they found that worldwide, more than 1 million deaths are attributable to the burning of fossil fuels in 2017, and more than half of those deaths were attributable to coal. Pollution is at once a global crisis and a devastatingly personal problem as well. It can be analyzed by satellites, but the particulate matter that we've been hearing a lot about lately, which is those very, very tiny particles that can actually infiltrate our lungs, and they can also sicken a person who's even cooking dinner nightly over a cook stove and getting all of those particulates into their system. And air pollution from burning fossil fuels can cause multiple health issues, as we mentioned, including combusting the additives found in gasoline. It produces cancer-causing ultrafine particulates that we talked about, as well as other toxic agents. Now, globally, fossil fuel pollution is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths. And in the United States, about 350,000 premature deaths in 2018 were attributable to fossil fuel-related pollution, with the highest number of deaths per capita in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, the coal-producing states. And the annual cost of the health impacts of fossil fuel-generated electricity in the U.S. is estimated to be up to $887 billion. And the environmental and health impacts of fossil fuels disproportionately, however, continues to harm communities of color and low-income communities. In a predominantly black and low-income area of Louisiana known as Cancer Alley, The cancer risk there is nearly 50 times higher than the national average due to the nearby location of 150 chemical plants and oil refineries in that area. So while the rest of us are not getting it in that concentrated a manner, we're still affected by it. And now, after years and years and decades in which governments and industry groups have often assumed that the shift to clean energy will be a great, great financial burden, well, indeed, economists and analysts are now increasingly making a case that the opposite's true. They're making a case that the transition to clean energy would lead to cost savings on a massive scale that would add to the current momentum we're seeing in this. A recent paper done by the University of Oxford economists and their mathematicians finds that a rapid transition to clean and renewable energy would lead to global savings of $26 trillion. And I have to think a lot of that's going to be in healthcare dollars. And that's compared to the cost of just maintaining what we have and doing nothing. Now, this is a lot, but here today to help us unpack some of this and to explore it and to understand it some more are two experts. We have with us today Dr. Gavin Dillingham from the Houston Advanced Research Center, and we have Emma Searson with Environment America. Now, Dr. Gavin Dillingham is Vice President of Research there at HART, which is what Houston Advanced Research Center is called. And he is Vice President of Research on their energy team. And in that role, Gavin also serves as Director of the U.S. Department of Energy's South Central and Upper West Combined Energy and Power TAP. He joined HART in 2012, and he leads a multi-stakeholder effort focusing on policy and programs to improve the climate resilience of our power infrastructure and our built environment, and to usher in the energy transition by way of a variety of clean energy initiatives. Gavin's current projects include being the principal investor for the Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technology Office program that is investigating rapid deployment of solar plus storage in low-income communities and neighborhoods. And he also runs HART's Energy Crossroad podcast, which is a podcast to help spur along the clean energy transition in Texas. Gavin received his PhD from Rice University. Welcome, Gavin, and did I get all of that right?
Yeah, Bernice, that was great. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and talk with you today.
Thank you, and we're glad that you could make time to join us today. And our other guest, Emma Searson with Environment America. And Environment America is one of the foremost organizations to promote core environmental values such as clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and clean energy to power our lives. Environment America is a national network of state environmental groups, and they have a large team of researchers, advocates, attorneys, and communication experts all working together to drive action and generate results in these areas. And of course, clean energy is one of Environment America's major planks. And Emma directs Environment America's national campaign for 100% renewable energy, working to advance the vision of a cleaner, healthier, and more resilient future powered by renewable energies in states across the country. Emma's primary focus is on state-level renewable energy policy, including renewable energy targets and standards. Emma has co-authored multiple reports quantifying renewable energy adoption in the U.S. and evaluating the potential to shift toward 100% clean and renewable energy. And she's also been featured and quoted by places such as the Washington Post, Roll Call, Forbes, among other outlets. Welcome, Emma. And did I get all of that right?
You sure did. Thank you so much, and I'm glad to be here.
And we're so glad, again, that you could make time to join us today. Now, Emma, I want to start out with you, though, if you can talk to us before we get into clean energy, renewable energy transition. Want to help our listeners understand the difference, if any, in the many related terms that are, I want to say often, but I'm tempted to say that are always used as it relates to clean energy, green energy, renewable energy. What is the major difference in clean energy and renewable energy and the others?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. And you're right, there are so many words getting thrown around. It's helpful to have some clarity. So to start with clean energy generally refers to energy that doesn't pollute. So I think the first thing that comes to mind for most of us here is global warming pollution or climate pollution. And it's true that clean energy resources are carbon-free resources. But truly clean energy should also be free of other air and water pollutants that can be harmful to the environment and to our health. Then renewable resources, on the other hand, are by definition inexhaustible. So they come from natural sources that are regenerative, or they are just practically unlimited. I think the best thing to think of here is the sun. No matter how much of the sun we use to power our lives, there's going to be plenty more of it. Now, at Environment America, we advocate for prioritizing resources that actually check both of these boxes, that are clean and renewable. So, we want to see energy that is pollution-free or as close to it as possible, but also inexhaustible and safe that can power our lives. So I think of solar and wind as easily fitting this definition, and then there are some others too, right? Like geothermal energy is largely clean and renewable as well.
And we're going to have to go to break, but when we come back, I want to start right back there. You've given us some good definitions of clean and renewable, so I want to dig deeper to see which renewable are clean and which aren't, and talk about some other things too. We'll be right back on the other side of the break. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lyndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on energy, the state of our clean energy transition that we're currently living in. Where are we and how are we doing with that? And we are back with Emma Searson with Environment America and Dr. Gavin Dillingham with the Houston Advanced Research Center. Again, thank you all for joining us. Now, right before we went to the break, Emma was giving us the differences in definitions of clean energy and renewable energy. And it became real obvious that there's a lot of crossover. So going back, if you can, again, maybe just kind of list what the common clean energy sources are, what the common renewable energy sources are, and which renewables are not clean.
Sure, I'll do my best. So clean energy, again, going back to that pollution-free energy, some good examples that come to mind are solar power, wind power. Some folks include some non-renewable sources here too. One example is nuclear energy. Folks might consider this clean because it doesn't produce carbon emissions. However, it's not renewable because it uses a finite resource and also has other environmental impacts to worry about, right, like with mining and with the waste.
So you're saying nuclear is clean but not renewable?
It's considered clean by most, that's right, but not renewable, exactly.
It seems to be one of those threading the needles. It can be considered clean because the definition of clean is carbon-free. Gavin, I wanted to get your way in on that in terms of nuclear being considered clean.
I mean, when you look at it, the key reason, it's a primary resource that we need to continue to think about is it's largely carbon neutral with its emissions, and can very much support the investment and further implementation of renewables into the grid. It's really important for some of the base load power that it provides. But when we look at anything, you have to look at the full life cycle from the very much origins of the plant material and the fuel all the way to the very end. And when you look at, talk about nuclear, the key benefit that we're most concerned about right now is the carbon neutrality of that resource as it burns, as it creates electricity and such. But there's a significant amount of debate across any of these power systems as far as their full, cleanness or their full potential negative impact on the environment and such.
In other words, for each of them, you could say it's complicated.
It is complicated, and you end up with, it depends on where you're looking at in the life cycle. Are you looking at the end use where it's producing the power? Then you end up, renewables are great in that regard. When we're looking at reduction in carbon, absolutely for nuclear. But then when you look at dealing with the waste associated with it, as well as the potential cost of impacts of mining this material and getting it to where it needs to be, and that's a different discussion, but it's the same with fossil fuels as well. We talk about natural gas, as far as a bridge fuel or transition fuel, and they talk about it being cleaner than coal when you burn it at the power plant, but completely disregarding any of the midstream emissions and the methane that comes from producing as well as transporting natural gas. And that's a much significant issue that tends to be overlooked sometimes when we discuss these different energy life cycles.
So how's natural gas technically defined?
It's not the renewable gas. There is renewable.
It's not clean.
Natural gas, such as biomass or such as biogas that comes from, say, food processing, wastewater treatment plants, that type of.
But it's not clean. It's not categorized as clean. They just like to say cleaner.
As far as natural gas goes,
yeah,
it's cleaner, relatively speaking, to other resources such as bunker fuel.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's clean. You can't say it's clean, but it's cleaner. And that's at one point a while back that confused me. So what do you mean clean? But because I kept seeing that, then I began to really pay attention to this thing, cleaner, not clean, but cleaner. It's complicated.
It can be complicated, fortunately, more folks, such as the work that Emma's team does, is looking at the full life cycle of these different types of energy resources. And ultimately, you do see from the full life cycle that the renewables are a better proposition, if that's storage, if that's wind, if that's geothermal, when you compare it to kind of our traditional fossil fuel assets that are out there.
Okay, now y'all tell us again which renewable is not clean?
Right, sure. So some resources that are renewable, and that there's plenty of them, they're regenerating, still pollute. One great example would be if you're burning wood, burning trees, burning biomass. All of these are, common terms for renewable resources that when you burn them still can pollute the air, right? Like anything you burn can contribute to climate change and also contribute to air pollution that's bad for human health. So I think that'd be a perfect example.
Oh, it is. It's a good example. Now, though, in terms of, we don't really burn wood a lot now for for power or to fuel our cars anymore. But are there any of those major renewables that are being talked about and or used or researched that are not clean?
As far as the major renewable resources, think solar power, wind power, geothermal power, all of those are renewable and clean. So really an ideal direction to be moving.
Okay. And so that makes sense when people use that word interchangeably, clean and renewable.
Absolutely. Though you can do it like you just did. To be more specific, you can say clean and renewable, and that way it's clear that you want both.
In this world, I tend to do that because I work with green, healthy, sustainable, environmental. And sometimes, as one editor pointed out to me, he says, Bernice, you're being redundant. But what I am into communications, because if people don't get it, they don't understand it, then they can't be mobilized. And so when you, like you said, use both terms that people hear. But that's also why I've taken the time at the beginning of our show to go through that and parse out what we talk about and what we mean with clean energy and renewable energy. And one of my last shows on energy, I added in there green energy so that everybody understands what we're talking about. Because way too often things don't get moved forward, perhaps, because people really don't understand, and they feel it's difficult because they don't understand, as opposed to like unpacking it, like we're doing today. So thank you. But I want to ask you this too, Emma, and then I want to talk to Gavin about some of the things that they're doing. And that is, over the last few years, what has been the trend toward our fossil fuel dependency and, of course, ascendancy of the clean energy transition? And are there any studies or surveys or polls on how people feel about this and what they know about the imperative for clean energy?
Absolutely. So I guess, first of all, looking at U.S. trends in our energy use, I see two simultaneous things that are happening. One is that clean and renewable energy is booming. We release an annual report called Renewables on the Rise that looks at just how fast renewables are growing. And we found that in 2020, America generated almost 4 times as much renewable electricity from the sun and the wind as we did about a decade before in 2011. So that is really rapid progress on the renewable front. But at the same time, that other trend is that we aren't getting off fossil fuels fast enough such that renewables are really replacing fossil fuel power. You know, we did see some temporary declines in fossil fuel use in 2020 related to the COVID pandemic, but U.S. fossil fuel production has actually grown last year in 2021, and our methane gas or natural gas production and demand are both expected to keep rising this year. So that means that renewables won't necessarily, even if they're growing quickly, won't necessarily be able to actually bring down our fossil fuel use. To get there, we actually need to stop using as many fossil fuels for power and for all those other energy needs.
Sounds like you're saying renewable use is really rising and doing good, but so is fossil fuel use.
Exactly. And there's so much we can do to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels still.
And we're going to, one more thing from you, Emma, we're going to go to break shortly. And after break, we want to talk a lot more to Gavin about drivers of clean energy. And we'll talk about some of the economics as well. And we don't have a lot of time to talk about it before we go to break. But I wanted to talk about the major environmental and public health benefits of renewable energy compared to fossil fuels. What would you say is number one and number two?
Sure. I mean, kind of going back to some of the things you pointed out at the very beginning, Bernice, just looking at the harms of fossil fuels, clean and renewable energy is often just the flip side of that, right? So burning fossil fuels is a major source of air pollution that is really harmful to human health and is actually causing thousands of deaths, tens of thousands of deaths in the United States each year. And on the flip side, if we transition to using more and more clean energy, that's lives we're saving. That's cleaner air for our communities and for Americans today and in the future.
Indeed, and we're going to go to break. And then later on in the show, too, I want to see if there are any statistics or estimates about what would be the cost or the numbers in terms of lives saved, diseases and illnesses and things like that. So we'll be right back on the other side with Dr. Gavin Dillingham with Houston Advanced Research Center and Emma Searson with Environment America. Thank you all for being with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on energy, the state of our clean/renewable energy transition that we're currently in. Now, we have with us today, just really helping us unpack what is a complicated set of circumstances and issues. We have with us Dr. Gavin Dillingham from the Houston Advanced Research Center, and we have Emma Searson with Environment America. And I want to start this segment off with you, Gavin. From where you work, where you sit, what are the most important drivers in the clean energy imperative and why? And we talked about it a little bit, but also going back into where does nuclear fit into this or not?
Yeah, absolutely. From where we are working right now, a lot of the drivers here is looking at to what degree can we support the deployment of renewables. And that's around battery storage, of course, and how does that continue to scale and to decrease the overall levelized costs of battery storage compared to other generating assets. It's really dependent on the economics of these different energy resources. You know, renewables such as utility scale solar, so the large solar plants, the large wind plants. Those are all very much lower cost than kind of traditional power plant systems, especially natural gas, coal systems. Even storage, in some degree, can compete up with what's called natural gas peaker plants, and are able to really provide services during hot peak summer months.
And I want to ask you this, from me sitting here and other people sitting in their homes or offices, help them understand storage and batteries. Because most of us see solar panels on top of the houses. The other side of the coin, or the other way we come in contact, is if we are buying from our provider and we're buying a renewable energy plant. So that's what we know. So help us understand where they come in and the importance of the storage and the batteries.
The storage piece here deals largely with the incremental nature of wind and solar with the renewables. The wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine all the time. Fortunately, in Texas, we have a nice balance, or getting a nice balance of solar and wind allows us to kind of offset the incremental nature of those. But you have to have the power available when those natural resources are not available. And storage, typically in this case, in many cases still, but it's starting to evolve, are lithium-ion batteries, large systems in that regard that are co-located. In some cases, are located next to solar and wind farms.
So when the sun goes down, and my neighbor who has the solar panels on their house, what happens there? They can't get any more power? Or?
Well, when you're looking at a household, when the sun goes down, all households are still interconnected to the grid for the most part, and so they get electricity from their utility company. If they do have a storage system, then they can potentially power the whole house depending on what the energy load is in that house. But the storage can offset some of the imported power from the utility.
Are there solar-powered generators?
Well, if you combine solar plus storage, you can call them a solar-powered generator, I would assume.
I was just asking if there's any such animal.
No, not
okay.
in the case that you're thinking. But, I mean, there's, you have your solar and storage systems. Think of, solar panels and a Tesla Powerwall, and that solar panels
charge the Powerwall
storage system, and then you can use that storage whenever the sun's not shining in that regard.
And therein lies the challenge. That's one of the challenges that we have to overcome in getting widespread deployment. You
have to overcome the cost associated with deploying of storage. It's still fairly cost prohibitive to do wide-scale on-site storage. That's why you're seeing it more likely to be on the larger size systems, just due to scale. Those economies of scale.
A larger size system like what? Like an Amazon plant or a power plant or what? Like
a utility scale. So 30, 40, 50, 100 megawatts, 250 megawatts, 500 megawatts.
Oh, a utility company generator.
Yeah, and any kind of commercial site.
Yeah, I was trying to get you not house scale.
Definitely not
commercial side scale. You're talking about utility plant scale. Okay.
Yeah, still pretty expensive at the house scale. And that's one of the projects we did with the Department of Energy, was seeing what was the best way to deploy those at residential level for low-income communities, and looked at.
What did you come up with? What are you finding?
Yeah, we came up with these micro solar plus storage units that allowed the Jackery, Generarc, Goal Zero. Those are the different types of brands that are out there, but they're 1,000-watt batteries with a 100-watt panel, and you can use those for some basic necessities in the house when the power does go out. So it's not for 24/7 operation, or it's not like what you think when you have a rooftop solar system. It's much more basic necessities, especially for those vulnerable populations that are, medically vulnerable or, homebound or need those types of resources. You're seeing, especially these companies, really promoting the resilience benefit of it, but you're not going to power your air conditioning with it, but you can power most of your major appliances.
They would have been a good thing to have last February when we up here in Dallas were without power for days.
Yeah, we had them deployed in Houston and helped out some communities with those, and now have deployed another 350 of them across Houston to help.
Now, are those available on a widespread commercial basis?
Oh, yeah, you can go buy them at Home Depot.
What is the name of them?
They're called Jackery is one name of them. Generarc is the one you can buy at Home Depot, but you can buy them on Amazon, get them delivered in the next day.
And they are just simply these auxiliary power units that are solar powered.
Yeah, they're about $1,500 for the panel and the battery.
And so when you use up all the, you have an outage and you use up all that power, and what do? You sit it out in the sun and let it.
You can have it charge and be used at the same time, so it can both produce power and charge at the same time. But yeah, you put the panel outside and it can charge.
And about how long would that $1,500 one last you?
Depends on what you have plugged in and how well you use it. Some of them can go, 3-4 days, but that's smaller appliances. You put your refrigerator in there, that's, maybe 10, 12 hours, depending on the size of the refrigerator.
I got you, but you make those choices of what do you want powered?
What's your necessities, yeah. And so that's what it's meant to serve, is not provide you all the comforts of home, but to allow you not to asphyxiate yourself with a gas generator during a power outage is kind of the main goal of that.
I think it's a good start. And hopefully if it goes the way so many other solar things go, then I've been impressed in that their prices tend to come down quickly.
Oh yeah, they're coming down rapidly.
So,
right.
And that's a really good start to get more momentum behind this. So let me ask you, Gavin, is there like a national or a global plan to just almost wholesale transition us to clean energy? Maybe the word should not be plan. Thought, discussion, committee, or energy?
There was, COP26 that happened latter part of last year, which was bringing together all these folks to talk about how to keep the planet at 1.5 degrees Celsius by reducing carbon emissions. And so everyone had their national determined concentrations, their NDCs laid out there, and their plans to carbon neutrality. So there's a plan, but there's a significant lack of trust among countries, and there's a significant concern about people not living up to their promises. And so that has really stymied some of the deployment and such. So there's been efforts, on the global scale to, from the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Accord, now with Glasgow.
Okay.
There's a lot of.
I hear them say geopolitical, and then you added the social into all of that. So it's complicated.
It's complicated.
I understand. Gavin, and we just have a few minutes to go before we go to break. I want to go back to what you were talking about with some of the projects and initiatives that you all are doing. Is there anything else out there that's emerging or that's about to come that is as handy as like the Jackery and those kinds of things?
No, and that's one of the things. We keep trying to focus on the sexy things. And one of the key things we really need to be focusing more on is the energy efficiency and really reducing overall load. That would make it less need to have all this deployment of renewables or have, you significantly reduce pollution out there. And we do a really poor job at doing the unsexy things because it's not cool new technologies necessarily.
Unsexy things like what?
The renewables. Everyone, I want a Tesla Powerwall. I want rooftop solar. And, when you really get down to it, what you really need is good insulation. You need good weather stripping. You need caulking, better mechanical systems, better energy management. And that can have a significant reduction in the overall demand that a house has or a commercial property has. But, you need to take that serious and really focus on that. And once again, you're not going to have as much deployment of these resources. And then when you look at the overall life cycle, you're not having to produce as much of this. You're not having to mine as much of those minerals and resources that significantly add to the overall environmental destruction that comes with the significant deployment of technologies we need to have if we do not just focus on energy efficiency and conservation there. And I wish there would be more focus in that regard, because that's really the cheapest way and probably the safest way to do a lot of this stuff is just really being better managers of our energy and of our resources.
To be better stewards over those things that we can and do control. Yeah, we had in one of our last show, I believe it was, and we talked about all those things you just mentioned, and we thought, well, maybe programmatically it should get into the code, the housing building code and the local housing safety code thing was one way perhaps to really get that going and make it more efficient. We're going to go to break, but when we come back, Gavin, want to talk about what are maybe some of the best or quickest ways for major sectors of our economy to transition. But we'll be right back on the other side of the break and talk with Emma Searson with Environment America and Dr. Gavin Dillingham with the Houston Advanced Research Center, because they are making us much smarter about this transition to clean energy that we're all in. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, none mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on energy, the state of our clean and renewable energy transition that we're currently living in. And we are back with Dr. Gavin Dillingham with HARC, which is the Houston Advanced Research Center, and with Emma Searson with Environment America. And again, thank you both for being with us today. Now, before the break, Gavin was talking to us about some of the challenges and vulnerabilities and complications. But I do want you to, if you can, Gavin, to tell us what you think are the best and perhaps quickest ways for major sectors of our economy to transition over to clean energy.
Absolutely. So one key area is just the industrial manufacturing space. It's still a very significant polluter and very difficult to transition them off fossil fuels just due to the heat content needed for some of the manufacturing processes. And so movement to potentially to hydrogen could play a big role if properly done and if you have the proper resources in place, which is right now still very, very costly.
But why hydrogen?
Hydrogen provides the heat content necessary that potentially some of the other electrification processes may not be able to provide, and moves us away from natural gas in some regards. So that's kind of one of the key areas for that. But then that requires carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which is known as blue hydrogen, or it requires green hydrogen with electrolysis using renewable energy. But that's still highly not very cost effective at this point. But moving the industrial space off of fossil fuels is going to be a key step forward.
Is that being worked on by smart people like you?
There's a significant amount of work focusing on that. We're part of the group that's funded by it's called the State Energy Conservation Office in Texas, that has the Texas Industrial Energy Efficiency Network. And so that's made up of folks trying to figure out how to decarbonize the industrial space. And DOE has its Advanced Manufacturing Office, which that's one of its key areas of focus, as well as decarbonizing industrial manufacturing.
That's a big deal, and impacts in that area, positive impacts will be a big deal too, but it's kind of like one of those unsexy things to you. You know, who knows about it, talks about it, or is interested in it, except a lot of, researchers and scientists and some of those manufacturing concerns. That's
a big one. And then, the movement to more of our, electric vehicles and away from internal combustion engines. That's key, and that's going to, it seems like it's rapidly happening, but you're just talking about a significant amount of inventory that has to be shifted to make that happen. And you also must be, greening the grid at the same time and making sure that, especially in some parts of the country, we're moving away more quickly from fossil fuel resources there, because otherwise you may end up just, redistributing some of the pollution in some regard. Not the case in all parts of the country, but there are places that have dirtier grids where rapid EV deployment without rapid deployment of renewables may not be as effective as what we initially.
So you're saying that you say dirtier grids. You mean that they're a mix of better or worse pollutants, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, depending on where you're looking around the country, there's some grids that are still predominantly coal and natural gas or fossil fuel based. There's others that have a stronger or a higher, such as ERCOT, for example.
Like ours, yeah.
Yeah, has a higher, proportion of renewables associated with it. And so it just depends on which part of the country you're looking at. But
I think what you're saying, if I'm not mistaken, I want to key in on that. Up there in coal country, where, the coal is still predominantly the generator, then even their adoption of EVs it's so dirty otherwise that their adoption of EVs is really not going to help a whole lot.
It'll help, but it's not as great of a benefit than if you're moving onto a grid, or then you're making those changes in a grid that's cleaner there. So.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Emma now, and Emma, and we may have, I don't think we mentioned it kind of all together, and that is how much renewable energy are we currently using? And I ponder and speculate, is it possible for all of America to run on renewable energy? And if so, how do we get there?
All great questions. So, I'll start with how much we're currently using. Today, a little more than 12% of America's electricity comes from the wind, the sun, and the earth, so the earth being geothermal power. And that is up from just 0.5% in 2001. So we've made huge strides in that time period. And actually, in the last decade, from 2011 to 2020, wind, solar, and geothermal power increased at an average rate of 15% per year. So if we could continue that average annual growth of 15% a year, we'd actually meet all of our electricity needs with renewables by 2035. So the growth is happening. It won't happen on its own, though. Continuing that kind of aggressive annual growth, it actually means we'd need to grow wind and solar by more every single year than the last year, right? And that won't happen naturally, but I do think that there are a few reasons why it's becoming increasingly possible for us to power our lives with clean and renewable energy. One is that our resources are practically unlimited in this country. We have so much wind and solar potential that we're not taking advantage of yet, that using those resources, we could power the whole country several times over. So the abundance is really there. Two, some of the tools we've been talking about during this show to capture that energy, like solar panels, wind turbines, even home batteries, all of those have continued to improve really vastly. So they're way more powerful, way more efficient than they used to be. And they've been getting more affordable at the same time, which is, a rare thing to see, both prices falling and quality improving like that. And when you take all of that together, it makes the idea of 100% clean energy much more imaginable. We actually look at, in this recent report we put out called We Have the Power, we look at research from a variety of different academic and government sources. And, different studies have described a bunch of different viable paths to get to meeting our energy needs 24/7, 365 days a year, while relying mostly or entirely on renewables. There are all sorts of disagreements about exactly which combination is best and how to save the most money and, have the fewest environmental impacts and all of that. But there is starting to be broad agreement that an energy system that mostly runs on renewables is feasible.
Indeed. And I imagine, Gavin, at a major research institution, y'all have pondered this as well.
Oh, absolutely. We put a considerable amount of thought into what's possible and what's not possible. And one of the key things we've really been looking at is looking at the overall resilience of the grid and weighing the difference between deploying more utility scale systems, such as utility scale solar and wind, versus on-site generation, such as microgrids, which are a combination of, say, solar storage, in some cases, what's called cogeneration, combined heat and power, and what's potentially the most reliable and the most resilient, as well as reducing overall emissions. And so that's one of the key things we try to better understand, too, and have valued into economic models is what's the resilience benefit? Because we can deploy a significant amount of additional utility scale stuff, which is wonderful. But what is the susceptibility of our transmission distribution lines to chronic and acute extreme weather events? Like in Texas, for example, New Orleans was a great example during Hurricane Ida when they knocked out all 7 transmission feeds into New Orleans. And that is a case where having on-site power, microgrids, more localized energy could be a much better resource in that regard. Unfortunately, once again, you go to the smaller distributed stuff, it's a bit more, the levelized cost of that's a bit more than the utility scale side of that, but we need to weigh what's the resilience benefit doing that versus kind of doing largely transmission distribution or utility scale.
And especially with the vagaries of climate change and these extreme weather events.
Yeah. So it's going to be a significant really very much a combination of utility scale on-site, hardening our transmission distribution infrastructure. And that's the other thing, is just making sure we have enough transmission distribution infrastructure to get the power where it needs to go. In Texas, they've curtailed wind development out in West Texas because there's just too much wind being produced. And so they have to curtail the wind, but now we see more solar coming online that has a nice, once again, kind of countering relationship with wind. Once again, we just don't have enough transmission distribution to get all the power, all the renewables that we do have in Texas to where they need to go.
That's interesting. But I know, again, smart people like you and Hark are studying this. And so we're going to figure it out. Now, Devin, I've heard you mentioned carbon neutrality. And I've seen that term bandied about. So what is carbon neutrality? Define it for our listeners, helping them to understand its intersection with clean energy and why they should care about it.
So as far as carbon neutrality goes, what we're looking for, so for example, I can talk about Hark's building. We're a net zero building at Hark. And so that largely means, and we have 84 kW of solar on our building, which means we actually produce more power than we import from the grid. And so we actually export a good bit of our power to the grid. And so we've become kind of carbon neutral in that regard as far as what's called site energy. We're net site energy zero, I think is the proper terminology. I'm not getting those words in right. Versus source energy, which we're trying to better define that piece. But really carbon neutrality is just ensuring that you have more renewables and producing less carbon than you're consuming.
Because the fossils is primarily which causes or generates carbon.
Right.
And to be carbon neutral, you need to make sure that you are generating more renewable or as much renewable as the fossil that you're putting out. Is that a way to think about it?
To think about it.
Okay. Well, thank you. And we're out of time, even though there's so much more we could be discussing, because both of you all are just making us smarter, helping us to understand a lot of these, quote, complicated matters and complicated areas that are all around us every day and that affect our daily being. So, again, thank you. And that is, of course, the goal of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. And we very much appreciate you all for helping us dig into this today. We have been with Emma Searson with Environment America and Dr. Gavin Dillingham with the Houston Advanced Research Center. Thank you all so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day, like yourself. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for being with us today, and join us again next week for our last show on energy, where we're going to talk about electric vehicles. Thank you.